ESTPs have that any that they put out there. So something that is helpful to do with ESTPs and ESFPs that both have that is like kind of try to include other people. Or I know I personally, kind of try to avoid bringing up other people that I know or whatever when I'm talking to someone else, because then I don't want to make them feel bad or whatever. But like it would work to go and do that and kind of go out of your way with with that ESTP or ESFP to mention other people and stuff, and try to, they put that any out there to kind of effort, kind of as their service to the world, but also um, as kind of, I think your eighth function also is kind of a go-between. It kind of keeps things at even keel. I know with myself personally with SI, I will use that when I first meet people. If I get mad at somebody that I'm close to, then I'll be especially like polite to them or whatever, which I'm gonna equate that with SI. Um, if somebody wants to keep things on an even keel with me and just make sure that things never go to any extremes or whatever, then if they're like consistently polite with me, then it'll just stay there, and they'll never really have a very big problem with me. I don't mean like in who I am personally, I just mean personality wise. And so if you look at the function that way with an ESTP, and it's also that way with the ESFPs, when you see them in a social setting, they won't stay, like with one person for a long time. They'll go with this person, that person, the other person, the other person. And that is kind of their personality's way of being polite. So to INFJs always say, like, don't take it personally if they're not, having a long, in-depth conversation with you in public. And also try to use those group dynamics a little bit, because try to like mix with several different people and stuff, and don't just stay with one person or whatever, because somehow that is the language that the ESTPs and the ESFPs speak. So, yeah. Oh, I also want to say that because they're the dual, and I am not going to say the ESTPs are this way with all types, but I've definitely noticed this with myself anyway. They are really, you have a lot more in common with your dual than you think you do. And you have a lot more power to influence them than you think you do. I think when you first get around each other, you kind of go and exaggerate the things about you that are different. But you really do have a lot more in common than you think you do. And you kind of have to be careful, actually, with ESTPs, because they're very kind of vulnerable and sensitive to an INFJ. I really don't know how to explain that and stuff, but when I've had problems with ESTPs, or like they're coming on strong or whatever, I'm sure that it must be different with some other types, because of what I've seen on forums and stuff, and even stories that I've heard from my dad of how people dealt with him and everything, and it was just fine and everything. But and this is not something I've only experienced with my dad. I've experienced it with all the other ESTPs that I've had contact with, is that you really have to kind of bring up things in a subtle way with them. Being an INFJ, you kind of have a secret language with your dual, and once you establish with them like what kind of person you are and everything, it has plenty of weight to it. Basically, you have the hardest part with an ESTP is when you first meet them. So you're just gonna have to kind of use your SE a little bit more and kind of clarify things and stuff. But it really is amazing with your dual, because they understand the point of what it is, of whatever you're saying. You don't really have to explain anything. They just kind of get it. They're not good for the INFJ stuff, but they can fathom it and they can understand it and stuff. So I would say that, being an INFJ, you really want to try to put your NI out there, and especially like on short-term things that it can be proven one way or the other, so that people can see it and perceive it and respect it and everything. That really helps a lot, with the ESTP. Also, don't avoid like talking about personal feelings and stuff like that. I mean, I know that they can get an overload pretty quickly, but you also need to put that in there because that's part of who you are. And they need to learn to also relate to you, which is something they might not necessarily think of. So you definitely kind of have to up the game a little bit and, put it out there. One thing that I would say that is really helpful with ESTPs is if there is something that like you don't like or that annoys you, whatever, as an INFJ, you have the tendency to go, well, I'm going to keep an eye on this thing. And if it keeps happening and keeps happening, then maybe it's going to be a problem. And then I'll think about, like what I'm going to do with it about it. And I think part of that is our TE blind spot, that we don't realize that you kind of have to have a foundation for things. And you can't just spring to action and just like do them. So and also because we have the SE in the 4th position, so it's either like too little or too much. So basically you have to say something right away, or you're going to have to wait until your SE is again appropriate, which is going to be like over the top, right? So I think kind of it can be a matter of pride too for INFJs. Like we don't want to admit that like a little thing can bother us or whatever, but just like put that aside and just don't worry about sounding simplistic with using like just saying what you think without really thinking about it, or saying how you feel without, dumbing it down to put it through the FE, and just say something. This is really the chance to use what is really easy for INFJs to do, which is saying something in an ambiguous way. I can give you an example with an ESTJ. She's a young ESTJ, and I was trying to give her a hint that she didn't really have the whole picture of what the world was like, because she was like looking overconfident. So I was like trying to help her, and she had an aspect of her appearance that was, really stood out, and I liked it personally, but I could feel that she was using this to try to be, intimidating. And so, since they have the SE as their 6th function, so it's pretty strong, but you have to be indirect. And so that's the point here. You kind of, so anyway, I just like complimented her on her. So I had something set up. So, if she was trying to be intimidating with it, she would take warning, because she kind of knows what she's up to, right? And if she wasn't, well, it didn't really do anything. And that's kind of how you have to do with ESTPs being an INFJ anyway, is you just kind of have to do things that can be taken several ways, and then you're good. So